Hey guys, welcome back to another Default Cube CG Matter tutorial, and today we are doing part 7, I think round 7, of the procedural node series, the Blender procedural nodes, and this, as I mentioned before, is going to be the last part of level 1, and from here on out we're going to get into much more complicated things, mainly being texture coordinates, so I want to congratulate you on making it this far, and today we are just going to be talking about our last topic for this, baby easy stuff, and that is going to be group nodes. And you may be thinking, okay, group nodes sounds cool. What is it? Okay, and here's what I would say to that. So here we have a node network. This should be almost, if not exactly, the same one that we did on part 3 or 4, where we talked about green screening. And what we want to do is take this node network, which is kind of, I mean, from our experience, this is a pretty big node network, but in reality, this isn't too bad. But we want to take something like this, which is a mess, and turn it into only like 1 or 2 nodes, because this is kind of disgusting to look at. And if you remember, this node network specifically does green screening. So what we did is we took a texture. So, any color background, we just happen to use green screen, but blue screen works as well. We also had an RGB node, which is the color of the background. So if this was blue, a blue screen, we'd set it to blue. And then we sent it through a bunch of math. And then finally, using this mix node, we could then pick the background. So we could have a red background or make it green again for some reason. But yeah. So if you want to learn how to do that, go back to that tutorial. But again, the basics where we took these two, separated them into their red, green, blue components. Again, these are three-dimensional quantities. They're vectors, however you want to think about it. And we just separated them into components. And for each one, we just, took the difference, squared it, and then added everything together. So that's why it looks like the same for R, G, and B. And then we basically just computed the distance between these two colors, creating a matte, which we can control using this greater than node to be like, oh, what kind of tolerance do we want? And then finally, we use this matte we made as our mixing factor for the foreground, which is the image, and then the background, which is whatever we choose. So there you go. So let me just connect this. Again, Alt right click drag for that nice connection. And now what we want to do is kind of like make it one node that we can plug two things into. So instead of having all this math exposed, we're going to make this one node so we can plug in whatever image we want and then pick whatever color we want to do the green screening with. And without getting like too in depth to start off with, what we can do is we just select everything except our output. So this is everything we want grouped together into one node. So again, you could do box selection or you can do any kind of selection. And then you are going to hit Control G, and that is short for group. And you're going to see that, all your nodes are there, the ones we selected, and there's kind of like this green background thing going on over here. And this is just to indicate it's all in the same group layer. To get out of this weird menu, you just click this button, which is go up the parent node tree. So we just click it, and now we have one node. And, that's cool, but as you can tell, we've kind of lost all control. We can't even change the color of, what we want to green screen out or our source image or whatever. We can disconnect, we can connect, we can even like do something in between, like, I don't know, multiply this by 2 or whatever. We can do stuff, but we've lost all control. So clearly we don't want to group everything. We just want to group everything except the inputs and outputs and all that that we want. Really, I just mean inputs. So, again, if you want to look at your node tree, and again, this is a node group, you can name it whatever you want, and you're going to see if this updates. Maybe it doesn't update. In here, there should be a node group section. Here it is, node group. And you can see we have our node group. We can rename it to like, this is our green screen node group, and it's going to update here. And this is useful. I need to make sure my face cam's out of the way. This is useful because if you make a bunch of node groups, you can then send them over to your different Blender projects, and that's how you don't keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again, so you only have to make it once. So that's part of the powered node groups. But to look into this node group, you just hit this button on the top right, you click that, and then you can see everything on this layer. So let's get rid of this node group. You can either right click and then do ungroup, or shortcut is Control Alt G, and you then have to just move it over. Okay, so now we are pretty much where we started off. But now we want to do this a bit better. So let's think about this. What do we not want in our node group? And so what do we want to be able to change later outside the node group? Well, we want to be able to change, again, what we're inputting. We want to be able to change the color. So let's start with that. So let's say we select everything except those. And then we're going to hit Control G. And then we're going to go up the parent tree. Well, now we have a node group that actually has inputs. And you can see it has two inputs for the texture, one for just choosing the texture, and the other one goes to the mix node from before. And then we have a third input, and that is the color of our background. But now what we can do is we can change the image. So I'm going to take this texture, and I'm just going to choose the second image I have. Now, since this has a similar green, it should work, whatever color we chose over here. But again, you can try to fine tune this. So let's switch to RGB, and you could you can see that you can do different green screen stuff. So this is our green screen node, and then we can plug in any two things over here. But of course, there are a couple issues. First of all, why do we have two inputs for the same thing? I feel like we could do it with one input. It'd be different if there were like two different image textures, but because of the logic of our node group, we want this input to go to both. And second of all, we want to have a bit more control, like that a greater than value that'll let us pick what we want in and out of our mat. We'd like control over that as well. So wait, first of all, before we fix those things, let me see if I can pick the best shade of green. Remember, we can use this eyedropper. And now, let's delete that. Yeah. So, for example, we do want that greater than value, so we can control that. So I'm just going to Control-Alt-G, that is ungroup, and try to reorganize everything. There is an add-on as well, other than a Node Wrangler. I think it's called Node Arrange. That should handle stuff like this, but let's ignore that for now. So the first thing we want to take care of is not having to have like two inputs just for this image texture. And you can see it's because it has two wires going to different spots. And I don't think I talked about this yet, but we can actually use something called rerouting. And the way you do this is not control right clicking or shift right clicking, but it is shift right clicking. I was trying to say not control right clicking or alt right clicking. So you hold shift, right click, drag over any two or three or however many wires, and you're going to see that it creates a reroute but actually connects them. So basically, we have our color going here, and now that one is what branches off into two. So if we group everything, including this reroute, and again, you could just, by the way, you could just type in reroute and add just this node here that you can add to different areas. And this is just for like a graph organization if you just do it on one wire. But what we're going to do now is we're going to select the same nodes as before, but then also our reroute, and then Control G, and let's go up the parent tree. And now we only have one input for our image texture and one input for our color that we want to green screen. Okay, cool. So how do we make this even better? Well, first of all, maybe you're sending this node, you're selling it or whatever. You want some better names here. How do we do that? So this is just organization stuff. So in here, you click N for properties the same way you click N up here. It's a window dependent. So this is what happens if you do it in the shader editor when you're in a node group. And you can see we have our inputs, our outputs. So make sure you're on this node tab over here. So you can see we have our inputs, all the names, and then our outputs. And if I haven't already mentioned it, you can see once we're inside this node group, basically you can see we have our two inputs, which are really from out here in the background. So you plug stuff in to this node group, and it comes out here, does its stuff, and then goes to the group output. So normally we do nodes to the material output node, to the surface socket, or whatever. But here inside a node group, the name of the game is you start with your group inputs, do the stuff in between, and your group output. So what I'm going to do is change the group input name. So let's just select the first one. And the first one is actually, you can see image is going down here, and this is the one that we actually choose the color of our green screen. And I want this to first of all be the second option, not the first. So I'm just going to click it and then drag it down, or just use this up and down arrow. And then we can rename this to maybe keying color, what color you're going to key out. And then for this input, we can choose, let's just say like input's actually pretty okay, but let's do input image, something like that. So now these are renamed. It doesn't change anything, but it just makes it more organized. for the viewer if you send this to somebody. And then you can also see we have this default value, and this is going to change depending on what it is that you're doing here. So here we have colors. You could also have values or vectors. So this default value is basically what it's going to be when you don't connect anything to it. So what is it going to be by default? So for example, with a math node, you can see that by default these are 0.5. There's no reason this could not have been 0, but it's because Blender chose 0.5 as the default value. So for the keying color, maybe it would make sense to, I guess it's already has this kind of green. Let's just do blue just to illustrate a point. And now when we go up our tree, we have our renaming. And then I'm just going to disconnect everything. And then normally you have to actually re-import in the node group before the default values refresh and everything. So you can either do that by, Shift A. Now that this thing exists, you can type in the name, which I think was green screen, and you can see now it shows up. But I guess this was our first node group before we started messing with stuff. So the second thing you can do is go down to group, and it will list all the node groups you made. So I think it's probably the newest one. And now you can see it has its default values inherited, and blue is what we set for default. But, of course, what we can do now is just connect what our input image is. Let's make that a bit bigger. And then our keying color. And let's connect that to our surface. So there you go. And let's actually do a bit of cleanup. So in our node groups, I said if you don't have all these options, go here and choose Blender file instead of, I don't know, you're probably on view layer. Blender file, this again lets you delete stuff from the file itself. So let's delete our green screen node group, our node group, and we can rename this one. We can rename this one to like green screen final. And you can see it changes the name over here. And now we said we wanted a couple more things. I think the main one was actually adding a value input for our greater than. And again, if we go into here, our greater than is this one right here, and we want to control this number. And you can see why we would want to do that, because before we had it somewhere here, and there's a bit of clipping. But if we just drag this down, it actually solved the issue. So we like control over that. So normally what we do is if this wasn't in a node group, we just put a value in here and just connect it so we can kind of control this externally. But of course we're in a node group, so what we want to do is for this, we want to use something from our group input. And again, we want to make a new one, so you can see we have our two inputs, and then a blank slot, which is for adding stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, the third one in this case, and connect it to greater than. And you can see effectively this added a third input, and it automatically knew it needed to be a value. Again, that's like a one-dimensional. It's just a number. It's just a value, and it's not a color, which is like almost the same thing as a vector. So it automatically recognized what it needed. And then for our value, we can give it a name, something like, threshold would be appropriate. And again, for this one, the default value stuff gives you even more control. So first of all, we can choose what default value we want. So let's say 1 when you don't connect anything to it or you don't specify what you want. And then the second thing is if we kind of exit out of here, you see that this already gives us a nice slider that we can control. And it does, what it would have done if it was connected to the greater than node. But you can see we can kind of go negative, positive, and in this case, there's no reason for us to go negative, so we can actually clamp. We can make a cutoff. So we don't want somebody to scroll beyond 0, so we don't need negative numbers. And then for maximum, I made a mistake in that tutorial. I said you wouldn't want to go above 1 because the distance between any two colors can't be greater than 1, but that's not true. It's actually square root of 3, which is kind of obvious once you look at it from the sense of this equation, because you can have a maximum distance of 1 between your red values, green values, and blue values. You add those square root of 3. So we wouldn't want to go above square root of 3, which is like 1 point something. So let's say 2 is the highest you can go. You can get more accurate. I wonder if you can actually type in like square root of 3. Oh, apparently you can. So there you go. And now, let's see, do we need a refresh? No, you see it doesn't go, I'm trying to go left, it doesn't go under 0. If we type in -1, I guess you can't override that, but there you go. Or you can override that, that's the issue. And then we can't go higher than square root of 3. But now we have control over this, and it has a nice name. And then finally, probably the last thing we need for this one is for our output. And by the way, you can have multiple outputs for a group for a group node. In this case, it doesn't really make much sense because what we'd want to output is our image, but I'll actually add another one just for demonstration. But we can rename our color output, and again, default values and everything. You know how that works now. So let's call this keyed like output or something, because that's what it is. And you can see just like our group input, we can have more outputs, and that will specify what it is when we actually make it. And maybe it'd be interesting to also output our matte. And this is just the black and white image that we're using as a factor. So I'm just going to connect this. Automatically knows it's a value, not a color. It's a black and white. You know, it's just a number. It's a one quantity. And we'll call this our matte. And this is something actually that's kind of realistic that you do. So let's, in this case, default value and all that don't matter because it's going to be determined by this math. So let's go out. And you can see now we have, we can change this. I'm just going to go back to our, I guess we don't have to re-import it that way. We can just select it from here. So green screen 1. And then just to make sure, I'm just going to view this and then select the shade of green I want just in case it's a bit different. So again, we can do all that, and we have our group node and everything's nice, but then we can also view our matte, which again is the black and white image, and maybe we want to do something with that. I don't know what it'd be. Maybe we could do something like this. So now that we've done all the calculations, we can send this now through a mix RGB. We're going to set this to multiply, let's say. And we haven't really talked about what all these blending modes do, but right now I'm not too worried about it. So we're going to set it to multiply, and let's have it multiply. I want to only have the background, so remove the person. It's going to look like black where the person is and then blue elsewhere. So let's multiply it by the matte, I believe, and then we have to invert it. Is that right? No, I'm going crazy. Let's see. What does this look like? Yeah, I think that should be right. I don't know why it's not giving the, oh, there we go. It's because of this mixing factor. So once we have a mixing factor of 1, it's just going to do the multiplication how we'd expect. And without like too much explanation, because this is a group node tutorial, what's happening is we already talked about like math with regions, so you should now understand this. What we're doing is we're taking our image and then multiplying it by this, where anything in here is going to get multiplied by 0 and therefore be black, 0, and everything here is multiplied by 1, meaning it's going to be whatever value was before, so it just retains whatever color that is. If this was 2, right, in the background, it'd be like a brighter blue in our output. And I guess we could do that just to, again, prove a point. Now, I don't think we're going to see this currently because of our color space. But I guess, you could do values in between, and that controls the brightness of the blue. So if we want 2, are we already in Filmic? Standard, I guess it does work. So there you go. I feel like you now know everything you need to know about group nodes, and if we were to go to a new Blender project, what we'd have to do is, let's say we want our green screen node, you go to F3 or spacebar or, file append, but I'm just going to type in the command append. And then you just want to choose the Blender file you just worked on. For me, that was untitled. And then you're going to find either in materials, we have our green screen material, or like we don't need the whole material, we just need the node group. You can go to node tree. And then you can see our green screen final, and you append that. And now in our new project that, again, this is independent from our previous one. Now if we go to group, we also have our green screen, and it's a nice looking node. This is something you could sell for, like, nobody would want this, but it's a good example. So now you understand everything there is to know about group nodes, how it helps you organize, how to control your inputs, your outputs, and append and all that. So you guys made it through level 1. Congratulations. This is where it starts getting really, really mathematical. People will tell you that, you could learn nodes without math. No, you need math. The math happens to be pretty simple in most cases, but this is where the math starts laying on. Not too badly. I think the next thing we're going to do is probably just make a circle that we can control. But yeah, there you go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed all the tutorials for level 1. I think I'm going to upload this as one segment of the course, so I'm just going to make a compilation video. But the best way to support me now that you made it through level 1 and you've gotten your free education is via Patreon. So if you appreciate the series and want to effectively, donate to me, but then also get some benefits, and there are some nice ones. There's some hidden information you'd only know via Patreon right now. If you want to do that, there's a link in the description. It'd be very, very appreciated. But other than that, thank you guys for sticking through level 1. There were 12,000 of you to begin with as I'm recording this. Losers are out of here now, and now we're down to like 6,000 or 5,000 or something. So you guys have made it past this threshold. We'll see if you make it past level 2. Thank you guys for watching. That's it.